What if the greatest code ever written was not locked inside a vault, but left open before billions of eyes, and still went unnoticed? Across millennia, ancient texts survived. Empires, wars, and collapses, preserving patterns that seem to speak not only about the past, but about cycles repeating with unsettling precision. Coincidence? Or message? When civilizations believed they were untouchable, these records had already described arrogance, decline, and reset. Now, in a hyper-connected, unstable, accelerated world, those same words echo again with uncomfortable force. Are we simply witnessing another historical phase, or the activation of an ancient pattern that has always been waiting for the right moment to be recognized? This is not a religious question, it is an investigation. Because when lines written thousands of years ago begin to mirror modern events, ignoring them stops being skepticism and starts becoming historical negligence. This investigation matters now because never before have humanity, technology, and global power aligned in such a fragile balance. Ancient scribes recorded warnings about societies that would grow too fast, trust too deeply in their own systems, and forget the limits that sustain them. This is not about predicting dates or specific disasters, but about recognizing collective behavior. What happens when a culture believes it cannot fail? What unfolds when information becomes weapon, currency, and control at the same time? These writings describe cycles of absolute confidence, followed by sudden rupture. Today, we see institutions under pressure, narratives in conflict, and a global population trapped between excess data and scarcity of meaning. The connection between past and present is not mystical, it is structural. History shows that civilizations do not collapse overnight. They follow invisible scripts that we only recognize once we are already inside them. Within biblical records, recurring symbols speak of watchfulness, measurement, and reckoning not as instant supernatural punishment, but as the consequence of accumulated choices. Cities described as too powerful to fall eventually crumble from within. Peoples who ignore signs of social erosion face internal division before any external threat arrives. These narratives use simple images, light, scales, walls to communicate profound ideas about balance and collective responsibility. When translated into modern language, the parallels become clear. Systems promising total stability, structures dependent on constant trust, societies testing their own boundaries. The strength of these accounts does not lie in spectacle, but in how precisely they capture repeated human behavior across centuries. They function as psychological and historical maps, showing how prosperity, excess, and correction form a predictable cycle. Modern parallels emerge when we observe how technology, economics, and politics reproduce these same ancient rhythms. Global networks amplify local decisions to planetary scale. Minor imbalances evolve into systemic crises. The promise of total control over data, markets, or narratives echoes old warnings about placing ultimate trust in human-made structures. We now possess tools that connect billions while simultaneously fragmenting shared reality. This tension between unity and division appears repeatedly in ancient texts as a turning point. The authors did not foresee the internet or algorithms. They described human nature reacting to amplified power. Whenever influence expands faster than collective maturity, instability follows. The central question remains: have we learned from previous cycles, or are we accelerating the same script on a global scale? The revelation comes when we understand that the code is not a secret cipher, but a pattern of cause and effect written in symbolic language. Prosperity creates confidence. Confidence breeds excess. Excess demands correction. This cycle appears across eras and cultures, yet biblical narratives compress it into unforgettable stories that endure generations. What feels like prophecy may also be a profound diagnosis of the human condition. When these patterns align with contemporary tensions, social unrest, struggles for power, institutional fragility, the illusion of prediction emerges because we are reliving the same process. The code was hidden only because we searched for spectacle instead of structure. Once the pattern is recognized, history stops looking like random accidents and begins to resemble a feedback system responding to repeated human decisions. This awareness leads to an uncomfortable reflection. If cycles are predictable, they are, to a degree, preventable. Ancient texts do not describe inevitable fate, but direction and consequence. They show that societies capable of recognizing their own excess can adjust before rupture. The difficulty lies in admitting vulnerability when everything appears functional, surrounded by extraordinary technological progress. We risk confusing technical capability with collective wisdom. The code suggests that growth without self-correction leads to instability. History reinforces this lesson again and again. This is not about fear, but clarity. The future is not a sealed script. It is a negotiation between pattern and choice. Recognizing the cycle is the first step toward interrupting it, or at least navigating it with awareness, rather than shock. Looking backward, every generation believed it was living in unprecedented times, and in many ways, it was. The difference now is speed. Cycles that once unfolded across centuries can compress into decades. That compression makes pattern recognition even more urgent. The biblical code functions as a historical lens, allowing comparison between ancient structures and modern systems. Tools evolve. Human behavior remains strikingly familiar. Concentrated power, inflated confidence, inevitable correction. Understanding this does not eliminate risk, but it increases response capacity. History stops being distant memory and becomes navigational equipment. Instead of asking whether events were predicted literally, the more relevant question is this: are we repeating a known pattern? And what will we choose to do differently this time? Perhaps the true warning was never about specific events, but about perception itself. The code hidden in plain sight has always pointed toward collective responsibility. Civilizations do not collapse by accident. They respond to accumulated choices. By recognizing the pattern, we move from spectators to conscious participants in an ongoing historical process. The final message is not fatalistic. It is an invitation to lucidity. Because once we understand the cycle, we gain the rare opportunity to influence its outcome. And if this transmission has crossed millennia to reach us now, perhaps its purpose was never to predict the end, but to ensure that when the pattern resurfaced, someone would be aware enough to recognize it. The signal has been sent. The interpretation now rests with us.